All right, so good morning. My name is Kat Maynard. I'm pretty sure you guys have joined me in the past. But today we're going to be talking about grief and loss in foster youth. And as you might notice, it says part one. So next month, I'll be actually going over grief and loss for foster parents. So just stay tuned for that. That'll be popping up. To get us going, there we go. So I know most of us know this, but what is grief? And grief is the experience of coping with loss. Most of us think of grief as happening in a painful period following the death of a loved one, but grief can accompany any event that disrupts or challenges our senses of normalcy or ourselves. And this includes the loss of connections that define us. Especially when we're talking about youth coming into care, the first time they come into care, that is one, aspect of a grief situation for them. Imagine a kid that has CPS coming to pick them up from school. So just literally the first day they come into your home is another time they experience grief. And we're going to talk a little bit about that more. So we have ambiguous loss, and this is the feeling of grief or distress combined with confusion about the lost person or relationship. And we see this often when we have our kiddos because there is the disconnect with their family. They are being removed from the home. Maybe they're no longer able to talk to the parent or caregiver that they had. And so we have this ambiguous feeling. And it's a much confusing time for a child because the person's not necessarily dead or they haven't passed away, but you're still not able to see them. And there's a lot of emotion and just, again, confusion for a child. Another part of this is there's two types of ambiguous loss. So when a person is physically present but psychologically unavailable, and when a person is physically absent but psychologically there. So that first part, when they're physically present, and this can be, when a child is in a home and the parent is struggling with substance abuse, or they're struggling with their own mental health. So they're physically there, but they're not able to emotionally be there for that child. And so that is a loss for the child. The other part is when the person is physically absent, but psychologically there. And this is what we see too, is when a child's placed in foster care, but, maybe depending on their relationship with their parent, that parent's, kind of has a voice still in that child's head, has maybe really put an impact and is making, negative comments about that child. That can still be carried over even into a foster home. And so those are the two ambiguous losses that we most commonly see. So with youth in foster care, this grieving process is often even more disrupted because their family might bounce into their lives for a small period and then disappear again. It's like a fresh loss on top of the pain of the past, and foster care ambiguous loss is one of the most complicated and difficult situations for grief. We've talked about this, in trainings, just like how children, we want them to have connections, but they're oftentimes dealing with that grief every time they go through a visit. They're having that grief cycle start over again. And, if say the parent is in and out of rehab, they're coming in and out of that child's life. So there's no real concrete, end result is what I'm trying to get at, for the child. There's no, closure there. It's a constant moving and shifting when we're talking about this kind of loss. So what I want to show you is a short video. Hopefully you can hear it.
When you were born, you were given an invisible suitcase. You take it everywhere you go. You can't control how it's packed, and it can spring open at any time. There are 3 things in your suitcase. Facts, such as historical events you learned at school. Facts with feelings attached, like how happy you were on holiday, or perhaps how sad you felt when someone important to you died. And finally, emotions. These can pop out of your suitcase when you least expect and take you back to a moment in life a long time ago. Perhaps the music on the radio or the smell of perfume reminds you of someone you miss and makes you cry. It's impossible to control when your suitcase opens, but you can choose what to do when it does. The best way to deal with your feelings and emotions is to talk about them with someone who won't judge or make fun of you. Sometimes you might just want to close your suitcase because of who you're with or what you're doing at the time. That's okay too. But constantly hiding your feelings can make your suitcase feel very heavy. If that sounds like your suitcase, then try talking to someone you trust and ask them to help. Do look after yourself as you carry your invisible suitcase through life. Safe travels.
I like that video. It's a short and sweet one and just kind of gives us a reminder that the kiddos that we have in our homes are always carrying a suitcase. They're always trying to figure out how to manage those emotions, and sometimes they just don't have the abilities to. And they can pop out at any point in time. We never know what might trigger a child, what, sights or smells or, memories might pop up. So we know that these kiddos are constantly carrying that suitcase of emotions, of the loss, their feelings. So just being mindful of that is really important. And I think even for ourselves, it's important that, we all carry some kind of invisible suitcase, and it's, up to us to be able to manage it and reach out when we need help. So there are some factors when we're talking about grief. So the first factor is a child's developmental level. How much are they really going to understand what's happening? We recently had a situation where there was a loss in a family for some few foster youth we had. And so the kids were of various ages. And so each one of them was able to comprehend the loss in a different way. The youngest one didn't quite understand, knew the person wasn't, they might pop up, they still asked if the person was coming to the visits. They knew that this day they weren't here. So they really kind of struggled with the whole comprehension that the person had passed away. They knew it was sadness, but they couldn't really put a pinpoint on it. The middle child, was trying to navigate and figure out, okay, I think this person's gonna not, come to the visit next time, and this is really hard. It's really sad. They had a lot of questions, but they weren't as, I guess, struggling with it. The oldest child really struggled, broke down the news. It hit them really hard. They were crying. They were, needed a lot of support and time. And so each one of those kiddos was on a different developmental level, especially regarding their age and kind of their ability to kind of understand what was occurring at that time. So we have to remind ourselves with the kids coming in that they're each at a different developmental level. So it's not chronological, but where they're at developmentally. The other factor is the significance of the people separated. So is this someone that they were really close to, whether this was a healthy or not healthy relationship? Is this someone that they just met? It was just kind of a caregiver or a relative that they didn't have a connection with. That's most important too, is how significant, because that's a huge impact. Whether the separation is temporary or permanent. So did this person actually pass away? Or is this because the child has been removed from the home? And we would hope that it was just going to be temporary, or the person has to move. So, we've had families where maybe the foster parents had divorced. So the child of, no cause on their end, has to be moved because those foster parents couldn't do it anymore. So just, was this permanent? Was this temporary? And then again, the degree of familiarity with the surroundings. So if they're going into a brand new home, I just had a kiddo being placed, was picked up from school, was placed in a foster home, had no idea what was going on. And he was in a different county. And that's a huge degree of difference. I've had situations where a kiddo came from the inner city and all of a sudden is in the country. So that's a big impact. That's a huge change for them in just their environment itself. And then on top of it, everything else that are the factors. So it's important to remember that when a kid, especially when they're coming into care, coming into your home, there's so many pieces involved in what they're going through. And as I said, the first day they're actually placed is probably one of the most detrimental because it is a giant shift on what's going to happen to them next. So it's really important to remember that. And if you do have any questions, you can always throw them in the chat. So I want you guys to be able to use the chat. I do want you to think about what are some foster youth losses. So think tangible and intangible. So we're talking about, tangible, so something they can hold, you can actually feel and see. And then intangible is something more internally. So what are some things that we might have, what are some things our foster youth might lose that are tangible and intangible? And you can throw them in the chat. Being moved from not only family, but also pets. Yes, absolutely. I remember when I was in residential, I had a young lady, she kept asking me if we could bring her dog, because that was the most important piece. I said, honey, I cannot bring your dog, but we can maybe have a stuffed animal. Physical items, family, friends, personal items. Yes. Yes, those are really important. Things that mean a lot to us. Sometimes those kids have a really, important blanket that they had or something of their parents that was important to them. If they're moved, as I mentioned, the one kiddo, he was moved, didn't even get to go home, was right from school. He didn't get to pick out any of his stuff that he brought with him. And so that was hard. Intangible, access to communication to online friends. Yes, that is big, especially for our older kids where they're having these deep connections with their friends. I mean, they're glued to their phones half the time. And it might be their only way of communicating with some people when they're not in school. So that is a huge one too. Definitely. Awesome list. So I did put a few in here. So some of the losses that we do have are the most, the important people. And I mentioned before, like these could be people that this was either a safe relationship or like a healthy relationship, or this could have been an unhealthy relationship. Those kids are still seeing that person as important. Pets, personal items, maybe they were part of a sports team, and now they're being moved. Maybe it's certain foods their parents made or family made. Maybe just the overall routine they had, the expectations. Maybe they were coming from a home where there maybe weren't so many expectations. There weren't a lot of rules. And now they're coming into a home where, we have structure, we have expectations to do this or that. Familiarity. They're brand new coming into these homes. They don't know you. They don't know your family. They don't know where they are. And so that is a huge piece because who can they turn to when they're uncomfortable? Who can they turn to when they're, nervous or scared or, have a question because you're a stranger? Traditions, customs. Maybe they had some, events that they would go on with their family that were important to them. And that's something that maybe the family they're moving in with don't do. And then their culture and heritage. It's really important to keep these connections, but sometimes, they're brand new for us. We're still learning. So we have to kind of figure a way to navigate this for the youth coming in. So I'm going to go into the grief cycle. I know we're all pretty familiar with it, but I just always want to give a review anyways. So the first piece of that is the denial, shock, and disbelief. So there's 3 emotional categories that go along with this. So say you have a child coming into your home for the first time and they're the shy child. So this is something you might introduce them, calmly. You're going to speak in a steady voice, show them around your home and, where they're going to put their things. You're really going to take the time, give them some distance, you're not going to overwhelm them with your presence. They're very, timid at this time, probably really quiet. Then we have the child with the nervous energy. You're still going to show them around, but you're going to be more direct, I would say. Offer some tasks like putting their belongings away, then assess if any energy releasing activities, such as maybe let's take a walk or go play basketball, or centering an activity like maybe reading a book or baking with you. Just activities that would help maybe calm them down. Again, give them some boundaries and letting them know where you're there to keep them safe, and help them find that control. And the last one is the forgetful and confused child. So keep things as simple as possible. When these kids are in the stage of grief, more than one direction at a time can be very overwhelming. And one little direction or one choice of something to do will let them settle in. You know, these are kids who might be confused and forgetful and are often unaware of their body and physical space. So they might be clumsy, maybe bumping into things, falling over, knocking belongings down. Avoid big gross motor activities like riding a bike and provide them non-breaking toys or activities. So if you have something that you really is important to you, like a piece of china or whatever, I would say put that away for when a child is confused or forgetful, because they're running through a lot of emotions and they're not really paying attention to what they're doing. The next one is anger. So when the realization sets in that the child or youth is not returning home soon, we start to see a shift. And oftentimes this one pops up when the honeymoon period is over. So we might see that physical aggression, the verbal aggressions, the meltdowns. They're just not able to regulate themselves at this point because they're just realizing, I might not go home right now, and so they really start to kind of test the limits, push the boundaries, and they're just, again, trying to figure out what is going on. Bargaining. So youth will try to negotiate or make deals to avoid or reverse a loss. So if I'm really good, I'll get to go home. Or if I'm going to really behave so terribly, they'll just want to get rid of me and send me home anyways. And this is pretty common is, when that honeymoon period is over, they start to feel a little more comfortable. And they're trying to figure out, how can I get back to my parents? Again, we would see this in my residential settings, is kids would really push the limits, test the limits, because they're trying to figure out, how did I get here? What am I going to do? How do I get back home? And they think, in their brains that if I act up, well, they'll have to send me home. I can't stay here. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But bargaining is one thing we definitely see. Then we have depression. The feelings of depression are normal part of grieving process. Signs of depression that may occur when someone is grieving include difficulty functioning, hopelessness, excessive sleeping, frequent crying, and withdrawal from loved ones. We could see the depression look like in various ways for different kiddos. This could be where they're really trying to keep it together, and they often have like a mask on, a fake smile. They're kind of working through perfection. And this is what depression could look like. So we're not always sitting in the corner and crying, but we could always be putting on a happy face and trying to do the best we possibly can, and pushing those emotions down to not even face them. And that is definitely depression. Finally, we have acceptance. And this does not mean the child or youth likes that they are in foster care. It just means that they're showing that they can move forward. The grief isn't over, because as we know, the grief cycle is, you can be going back and forth, you could be stuck in an area for a bit. It's constantly shifting, but it just means that they're able to kind of move forward. They understand that they're in foster care. They may not be with their parent at this time, but they're going to work towards what they need to. And so it's important for us to kind of help these children get to this point. Any questions so far? Okay. So how do we support our youth? The biggest piece is communication. And this is just for anyone every day, I think. So when you're talking about youth, invite youth to talk about any people, places, or things that they're missing. Be patient with how they choose to express their grief and let them know you are available to talk. Um, I think just opening that door and saying, hey, if you need to talk about anything, I'm going to be here for you. You're still giving them the space. You're kind of giving them that control because they're not going to always want to talk about it right away. And we're talking about grief too. We're talking about the grief cycle regarding visits. Every week we are going through this cycle because every week they're seeing their parents or their caregiver or siblings, and then they have to leave that visit. So they're kind of always in that grief cycle when it comes to seeing their families and keeping those connections. So having that communication and letting them know that you're a safe space is really important. Assurance. Recognize and acknowledge the challenge of being separated from family, friends, communities, etc. Validate their feelings and allow them to grieve in their own way as long as they their behaviors do not hurt others or themselves. Should just let you know, like, I see you're struggling, or I see that you're really upset about how things are working out right now. And it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel sad. Letting these kiddos have permission to feel this way is, gonna help them process through as well. Because feel like there's a lot of shame in some kiddos with the communities they're coming from, where you're not supposed to cry, or in societies, boys don't cry, you can't feel any emotions. I think there's some of our kids are always built with this tough exterior too, but just letting them know that it's okay. They're going to feel validated and heard. The next piece is choices. And youth are often, who are grieving, can experience personal empowerment and they have options presented to them. It's important to give the youth a chance to decide whether they want to talk about their losses, what to do with personal belongings, and even simple things such as what to eat for breakfast. Again, when kiddos are coming into care, they're having that choice of them going home is out of their hands at that point. And they're feeling very, I would say, defeated and deflated and feeling like things are just literally out of their control. But it's up to us as the adult to kind of rebuild that for them, help them with that, rebuild their self-esteem, giving them their choices. They're building, they're able to rebuild that. And so again, for some kids, it's just a simple task of, would you like this cereal, that cereal, instead of you making that choice for them. Putting the power back in their hands, even if it's small ones. Honesty. So youth in foster care have a right to know about separation, the person and or people from whom they have been separated, and the circumstances surrounding the loss. Now, regarding this piece, it's kind of depending on the kid's age. You're not going to go and tell a 6-year-old, hey, yeah, you were removed because your parents are in rehab. You would say it in a manner of your mom or dad or your caregiver. Right now they're just trying to get some things back together and get their feet on the ground and take care of themselves to make themselves healthy. So you'd word it in a way that you're not having any negative comments towards that child's parent, but you're acknowledging that they're currently not here and it's upsetting for the child, and you're having that dialogue. Some kiddos just are more aware. So youth who are grieving appreciate honest information related to the loss and any other potential changes. I have one youth, and he tells his foster parent, he goes, yeah, I know my mom will choose alcohol over me. And so they're able to kind of have that conversation, and it's on his time when he talks about it. The foster parent is not, bringing up these conversations. It's when he's want to talk about it. And she goes over it with him and says, I'm really sorry that you're feeling like your mom's choosing that over you. And right now we're going to focus on what's best for you. And hopefully she can get her feet on the ground and we can move forward. So again, just being honest is again based on their child's developmental level and really understanding. But just being honest is key. I think we ask for our kids to be honest with us, so it's important for us to do it in a way that's appropriate for each child. Stability. Youth in foster care often have experienced multiple changes at times, placement moves. Youth need a stable presence of supports from family, friends, and trusted adults. Stability is directly related to the well-being of youth in foster care. So most times we're getting kiddos who it's their first time in foster care. However, we don't know what kind of living situation they had prior to them coming here. They might have been going from relative to relative, from shelter to this home to that home to maybe no home. So this child might have had multiple moves. And so when you're having multiple moves, you're grieving the inability to not create a foundation, to not build strong relationships with people, or even have relationships with others. So it's important for our foster homes to have that stability, to provide that. And that can be very intimidating to kids, just because they're not used to it. So you might see some pushback, but it's really important for stability, for routine. And when you're, that is going to help empower that child as they get older for having that stable environment. Another one is privacy. When youth is grieving, adults tend to want to find ways to comfort them right away. Honor the privacy youth need while grieving and know that youth are grieving often find themselves intentionally isolating themselves. So my own experience is my son, his mother recently went to rehab. And so, for him, he had to have time. And I wasn't going to all of a sudden bombard him and ask him like, oh, how are you feeling? Or are you okay? Do you need anything? I let him have a few days to kind of process what was going on. I let him know that we were here for him and his dad. And so you're giving that child time, especially when they're older, that you also want to make sure the child, of course, is being safe, that they're not all of a sudden going down a spiral path. But giving them that time, giving them, you don't want to be all up in their grill, just asking them a bunch of questions where they don't feel comfortable or don't even know how to answer. And so allowing them to have those moments and giving them that permission to do so. So the few of the resources I utilize with the child's journey through placement. This is a highly readable book for foster parents. And so that's an important piece that you could utilize. And then also helping children cope with separation and loss is a classic book. I have not read this one, but it is one that I have found. So these are a few resources regarding grief in kids. So I know that was, I don't even know what time it is. I know it's kind of quick. Does anyone have any questions regarding this material? You don't? No biggie. What was the last book title? It was Helping Children Cope with Separation and Loss. So, you're welcome. I think I might have also added, oh, I did. So as I mentioned, we're also going to be bringing a training in that talks about the grief and loss for foster parents. I think this is also important for every family, just because grief and loss look vastly different for everybody. So this could be a child that is returning to a parent. This could be a child who's aging out of the home. This could be a child who have disrupted from your place. And so when we're talking about the child's grief and loss, we have to acknowledge our own as well. So I really appreciate everyone joining us. Any tips on helping kids with process when you have not experienced situations like theirs? I think being, again, with that honesty, letting them know, hey, I've never been in this situation. But I see that you're, I have a lot of pain. You're hurt right now. And, you can give an example of a time that you felt sad or you felt some grief. It's not going to be the same as theirs per se. Um, but I think sharing some experiences where how you were able to process through, can always help. This is not where a situation where you would be giving them the solution for them processing, but just kind of being there, for them and just acknowledging that you're here for them, you see it. But you can always use that because there's definitely times, I would say more often than not, where we're getting kiddos from experiences where we would have never, we have never seen that. And these kids have lived a lifetime in a very short span. And so again, just acknowledging that they're tough kids and that we're just here to listen, and just acknowledging what they've gone through is really important. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, don't try to give them the solution. We want to do solution focused trauma informed care. So like if they're processing through, ask them like, have you dealt with this before? Did it, what did you do last time this happened? If we're going through experiences, especially when we're talking about visits, and we know these visits, they're weekly visits, and they've had a great visit day, and maybe they're really struggling afterwards, and we work with them on that. And then next time that happens, you ask them, hey, what did you do last time when you struggled with this? And see what they can come up with. It's creating that dialogue, creating that conversation with them. It's not always easy, and it does take practice, but that's important for them. Them to be able to kind of work and build on their own strengths. That's going to help them later on in life. So with that, I'm going to stop recording.